went on another tangent instead of watching this video. So as I was saying 45 minutes ago, this is a Prager U video I've had queued up forever. What was the Cold War? People seem to like when we react to Prager U, and I talk about the Cold War is probably my favorite thing to discuss. Thing I've probably studied the most out of anything. So yeah, I'm excited to break this down.
From the end of World War II, the United States and its Western European allies were involved in a nearly half-century-long titanic struggle with the Soviet Union, known as the Cold War. It was cold only in the sense that the Russians and Americans never came to direct blows, but it was certainly not cold for the Cubans, Koreans, Vietnamese, and others who got caught up in the communists' relentless drive to destabilize the free, democratic, capitalist world.
They just keep adding words like buzzwords: the free, democratic, capitalist, human rights, democracy, super freedom, world. And what's funny is part of what they're saying is true. Like, I've made this point before. The Cold War wasn't a Cold War for Vietnam and for Korea and for Latin America, who, you know, had Operation Condor, where all these right-wing U.S.-backed dictators were put in power, armed to the teeth, and trained up in CIA torture tactics, and given kill lists, hit lists of people with the left-wing ideology to either kill or torture them. So, you know, the Cold War was very violent, and there was a lot of fighting, but it was the Soviet Union usually giving mild to, you know, firm support for workers' movements, people's movements, socialist movements, and the U.S. backing the most horrific, violent, fascist groups that they could. First they'll back a liberal group in another country, right? If they can get a more centrist group that supports them and acts as sort of compradors. But if that doesn't work, like in Chile, when they helped beat Allende in 2 elections by funneling money into the country, but then Allende wins, and they go, okay, well, let's side with Pinochet. Let's give a bunch of arms and weapons to the fascists, because we know that they'll act and actually violently take Allende out of power. So you have violence that's brought to all these countries by capitalism, by the United States, the dictatorship of the ruling capitalist financial oligarch class. And yeah, they brought death and destruction all over the world. And I guess it's easy to just say, nope, the Soviets did it.
You know what I think is funny? We're 30 seconds in, and already they're just lying like crazy. You know, they're either lying by acting as if they're experts on a subject they have not verified, or they're acting as if like it was the Soviets who were like, hey guys, come into our relentless drive to destabilize freedom, right? Like, that's ridiculous. As if these countries weren't fighting in their own particular way for their own freedom against the capitalist world, which is neither free nor democratic in the sense that PragerU means it here.
As soon as I heard him speak, for some reason I thought about a very Esha K style thought about what should be done. For safety measures, I'm going to withhold the rest of the comment. But
oh no, we need Esha here. We got to invite her on stream to make the joke for us that we're too afraid to make.
For legal reasons.
Does anyone like have her number or email? Just like, hey, can you come make a joke for us?
Have a pre-recording of Esha saying Stalin should have killed more people, and then whenever stuff like this is watched, we just press it. She pops up on screen, and it ends up becoming a thing. No, but I mean, it's ridiculous, and I mean, I hear it every time I'm in Miami. But if you really look at the living standard of people in Cuba before and after the revolution, what the social fragmentation looked like, and you sit there and say that it was a free, democratic place, it's just absurd. At some point in the 20th century, the words freedom and democracy became, at least for the West, synonymous with capitalism. And it wasn't like that, right? In the 19th century, most Americans understood that capitalism and enterprise was antagonistic, if not somewhat incompatible with the ideals of democracy and freedom. That changes, and it's a very weird change. And the only way you can make sense of it is if you think of freedom as freedom of enterprise, freedom to exploit, and democracy as democracy of the capitalists to choose whatever the hell they want, as they battle within their own ranks for what puppet is going to represent them in the following election. That's the only way that that statement makes sense. Yeah, that sort of freedom to exploit was fought against, and it was destabilized, and in many places it won. In other places it didn't win because of the efforts of the U.S. empire backing the national comprador classes, and or because it won, and then the hybrid warfare and sanctions that came in afterwards made it fall. Like it happened in Chile, it happened in Nicaragua and in other places where socialists won, and because they weren't able to solidify enough the state, they withheld, as Che used to say, a small window slit open that imperialism was able to get in and do its job. But it's I always get mad when we watch these videos.
Real quick, exactly what you were saying, Carlos. Lenin, one of my favorite quotes from Lenin is real quick. He just says, freedom for whom? To do what?
Right. The same thing with democracy. Democracy for whom?
Right.
And that's very important when you have a class analysis. Freedom for who? Democracy for who? None of freedom or democracy, they don't exist in the abstract, right? Yeah, someone mentioned here Cuba's life. Cubans live on average 3 years more than Americans right now. A small island that was historically made because of colonialism, dependent on one product and trading that product with the U.S. This small island that has been blocked and been the subject of hybrid warfare by the most formidable of enemies human history has seen, has their people living on average 3 years longer than the enemy. Where
sounds like the free world to me. But
the
it's not capitalist. I'm confused.
Then the enemy that, because of its fucking size, it's able, and because of its status as an empire, it's able to cipher all the super profits here. But where do those super profits go? Who benefits from that? Is it working people? Is it poor people? Or are we just applying, as Noah once brilliantly said, left-wing Reaganomics and trickle-down economics understanding when we talk in those ways?
Oh, people got mad for saying that. By the way,
right.
Paul, stop texting me. You know I'm streaming. You were watching.
We'll see if we can get through the rest of this video without Carlos slamming his head through the camera. Try not to take it too personal what they say, Carlos. Nobody believes these guys.
Physics asked a question here. No, it's not real. Go ahead.
No, it's not. Esha actually breaks that down pretty well.
Fur just did a book. Grover Fur's last book was on that, and we interviewed him on that as well. So
there you go. Perfect.
There were, to be sure, many morally complex moments during this long struggle. But the Cold War was, at its core, as clear a conflict of good versus evil as World War II had been. Just like that war, the Cold War was a death match between the forces representing freedom and the forces representing totalitarianism. Because hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, died in it, the Cold War can...
I feel like there's no way you could even think this stuff unless you're rich. It's almost like they're stating the CIA strategy, like, we're going to get everyone to think the Cold War was a battle of just good and freedom versus evil and totalitarianism, but they just say it, without even providing any evidence. It's like, if you live in the West, if you live in the US, it's not this perfect bastion of freedom and democracy. So who the hell believes this except people with millions and millions and millions of dollars, like the Prager people who make these videos, which is why they're so widely mocked. I'm sure people can recognize how ridiculous they are, but there are people who watch this and follow them, which is kind of wild.
Beyond which, like, totalitarianism is a silly, made-up cartoon word.
Made up by the CIA funding Hannah Arendt to purposefully conflate communism and fascism during World War II. Like, it was made for this purpose, to say that communism is the same as fascism.
I also like that, like, he goes from hundreds of thousands to millions because there's no actual number here, right? He's just making shit up. When you just make shit up and you don't have to, like, really back anything up, you can just make statements. You can say anything you want.
And I think it's testament how easily this is like debunkable, and how it still gets maybe 100 times as many views as anything that we make. is testament to the power of having that institutional backing and financial capabilities to have nice videos like that.
Yeah.
Right? It's the infographics that does it. It's the
Imagine
cool
if we
little
had that funding.
right. If we had the funding to do something like that, maybe we can get somewhere near their numbers on YouTube. But it's just the funding. You get a dude in a suit with a fresh haircut to say some dumb shit, and you put some nice graphics along with it, and it looks official. And most people don't have enough time out of their day to really think about that too long, and to look up what the truth actually is, and to read the books that we've all read in order to be able to talk in the ways that we're talking.
Yeah.
It works, and it's what would we be able to do if we had that sort of funding, right? If we had infographics to counter those infographics. We need yes, we do.
If any bourgeoisie out there want to be class traders, just let us know.
Yes, our Patreon is Midwestern Marks, and you can give as much as you want, or just shoot it directly to our PayPal.
Or just get a hold of us. We're fine, like taking checks, whatever.
Whatever you want to give.
Is class trading.
I want to point out too that it's also just because I spend a lot of time on social media making this content. It's also the algorithms are the other thing. Like, the algorithms are designed to support a certain kind of content too, which is why there was such a panic about TikTok and a move to force TikTok to give data management over to a US based company. And then now you have literal NATO operatives running the app because people like us were blowing up.
And with good reason, be described as the Third World War. The instigator of this war was Joseph Stalin, the mass-murdering dictator of Russia and of the many non-Russian peoples he had incorporated into what was known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union for short. Stalin knew that his Soviet armed forces could not take on the might of the Free West. Instead, he decided to wage this fight through the use of proxies, and by a massive use of disinformation and misinformation. His initial prey was Eastern Europe, the Baltic states.
It's all projection. It's always projection. The misinformation and disinformation made me think the first coup that the U.S. did at the end of World War II to kick off the Cold War was the coup of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala. Not even a communist or socialist, just someone who had mild plans for land redistribution that would have hurt the United Fruit Company. And when the U.S. was doing that coup, putting, I believe, Castillo Armas in power, they dropped pamphlets and they dropped like fake newspaper clippings to trick people into agreeing with the U.S. coup and with the U.S. color revolution type deal. And now they, with Libya and Syria, there's overwhelming evidence they did the same thing. There were these influence campaigns where they got people together who were interested in overthrowing the country. The 2014 coup in Ukraine. There were tons of NGO-backed influence campaigns to use misinformation and disinformation to overthrow these countries and to do it by proxy, which is everything they just accused Stalin of doing. It's like a perfect explanation of what the U.S. did. And like I said earlier, they're even arguing that the Cold War is a sort of World War III that took place in the global South, which is something I've argued myself. But that they just invert it. They just completely invert reality and say everything that, the capitalist empire did over those years was actually just Stalin, even after he died, apparent somehow.
I also like they always use the misleading language, right? He was the dictator of Russia. And then he talks about all the countries that he made Russia. Like, it's just so silly. Like, They don't ever say how or why, because there's no how and no why.
Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, as well as Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Czechoslovakia. Stalin had troops in all these countries at the end of the war. Despite what he promised American President Franklin Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference, the Soviet leader had no intention of removing them, and gaining control over their governments proved to be quite easy. In March 1946, Winston Churchill famously declared that from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. When Stalin threatened both Greece and Turkey, President Harry Truman finally had enough. The so-called Truman Doctrine was born. The United States and its allies would not permit any further expansion of the communist empire. The Cold War was on.
I love how they say it was quite easy for Stalin to take control of these other Soviet governments. Like, oh, do you mean their people actually wanted socialism? Do you mean that they democratically wanted this and it wasn't just Stalin enforcing it top down? So then when you think about it that way, like these people actually wanted socialism and communism in the East because they did. The Truman Doctrine is then not defensive. It's offensive. It's saying we're going to stop people from enacting the ideology or the system that they want. We are going to militarily intervene because we've decided that communism and socialism are off limits. So we'll literally pass a doctrine allowing us to murder, bomb, drop napalm and Agent Orange on anybody who moves towards communism. Like, don't they have the right to choose whatever system they want? You know, who are we to say that these people can't choose socialism and will murder you if you do it? But that's what the Truman Doctrine is or was, and they just invert it. They just invert, oh, well, there was a communist empire. Communism was spreading. Yeah, because people realized capitalism was full of shit in the East.
I want to just signal this comment real quick. You know who else thought that the narrative of Stalin as a dictator was stupid and false? The CIA. There's leaked documents that, you know, they say he's not a dictator. The decisions are made democratically. There's bodies that decide and consult, and there's all these other things. But yet a good amount of Marxists continue to say something that even the CIA admitted wasn't true about Stalin.
For the next 5 decades and across 4 continents, Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America, the US and the Soviet Union battled for influence, sometimes overtly, like in Korea and Vietnam, and sometimes covertly through their various spy agencies.
Can you pause real quick?
The moral lines of this battle.
So I want everybody to think about who was the one invading other countries over and over during this. And that might get you to think a little bit about who the actual aggressor of the Cold War was. And, you know, they talk about like Stalin's promises to FDR. Stalin kept every promise to FDR he had. The fact is, though, America started breaking promises, and FDR was not in office for all time, right? So while FDR, for the most part, wanted friendly relations with the Soviets, he's only one man and only one point in time.
For sure. And I mean, you say, look at who was doing the invasions, and we've talked about this before. After the UN was formed at the end of World War II, the first like 50 vetoes in the Security Council were the Soviet Union vetoing the US trying to invade different places. And then they don't even talk about Operation Condor. They just say, you know, the covert actions of intelligence agencies. Like, oh, you're not even going to mention the hundreds of thousands of people tortured and killed to death by the CIA in Latin America because they had a left-wing ideology. Of course, they're not going to bring that up. They'll just gloss over it. Well, the U.S. was doing some things covertly, too. We don't have to talk about that. It's not like they were killing every leftist in an entire continent.
Never changed. The freedom of the West versus the communist tyranny of the Soviet East. There are, nonetheless, as there were even at the time, those who argue that the Cold War was an overreaction by the West, that the ambitions and strength of the Soviet bloc were greatly exaggerated, and that America, with its massive defense build-up, was just as responsible for the Cold War as was the Soviet Union. But this simply isn't true, as an immense amount of archival evidence from Russia, not available until after the Cold War ended, now proves. Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, stated Soviet intentions plainly in 1956. "We will bury you," he told the West.
Hey, can you pause real quick, Eddie?
You just muted yourself, Noah.
Sorry, I just want to point out a really clever way they propagandistically put something. He makes a fake point in order to debunk it. Like just a minute ago, he was saying that, oh, some people said that actually the Soviets weren't a big threat because, you know, they weren't as advanced and powerful as everyone thought they were. That's not true. They were. They were very advanced and powerful. The point still remains, though, that they weren't a threat, you know, not to us regular Americans. They were a threat, of course, to the corporations that were scared that their profit margins were shrinking and they'd be overthrown by us. And when Nikita Khrushchev said we'd bury you, he's talking about our working class. Anyway, yeah, I just had to mention that. Sorry.
No, that quote from Nikita Khrushchev actually proves that everything the Soviet Union did throughout the Cold War was bad. You know, before he was in office, after he was in office, you know, he said, "We will bury you." So I don't know why you're demanding more proof or more evidence for their claims, Noah. Just listen to the Prager, you guy. He's in a nice suit.
And he's talking about this archive thing that he doesn't really specify, and he doesn't also specify some of the manipulation that has occurred in the archives.
He's got a real punchable face, too.
If you just throw out a term like that, it's been proven by a ton of archival evidence that has came out after the Soviet Union fell.
Which is what I mean, they thought, the CIA and some of the Americans thought when the Soviet Union fell and they got access to the archives, they were going to be like, oh, you know, here's why they were such murderous, evil dictators. And they found the opposite. Like there was a quote from a CIA agent or officer who said, like, before the Soviet Union fell and we had access to the archives, we wondered, why were they doing this? And then after we got access to the archives, we went, oh, they were doing it because they're communists, because they're socialists, because they're actually trying to build a better world.
Yep.
Amount of negotiation, detente, as it was called then, have led to a just conclusion of the war. The American diplomat George Kennan rightly warned that short of becoming a communist country, there was nothing the United States could do to gain the Kremlin's trust. The Soviets could not be appeased, only contained. But even containment was an inadequate strategy. Yes, the Soviet Union could not have beaten the US in a head-to-head confrontation, but it didn't have to. Victory in the Cold War would have allowed it, through intimidation and subversion, to dominate the globe, making communism, rather than democracy and capitalism, the preeminent ideology. There were many...
So what are you doing then? By making capitalism the preeminent ideology, how are you not dominating the globe? Do you not realize you're a capitalist saying this? Like, then what the hell are you?
I get so distracted by how nice the editing is, and if you're not aware of how everything he's saying is bullshit, it's very easy to get lost in the fact that somehow he made all the landmass on Earth turn red. And that's pretty cool. I've played around with Canva, never figured that out.
Times during the 5 decades of the war that it seemed like this would be the case. But thanks primarily to the strong leadership shown by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II, the Cold War ended not with a bang, but a whimper. The Soviet Union was, at the close of the 1980s, to use historian Paul Johnson's description, a bewildered giant. Economic
how can you say it went out with a whimper when it was a human rights disaster? When the Soviet Union fell, people were thrown into poverty. The drug trade and sex trade flowed back over the border for the first time. It's considered one of the worst events in the entire region's history. People had employment and education and all these things guaranteed to them, and they lost that. And it was horrific as far as the standard of life went. Life expectancy and all these different stats that measure human well-being went down. It was a human rights disaster. So to just call that a whimper is, to just dismiss the struggle of all those people, or all the people whose lives were thrown into chaos with the fall of the Soviet Union, which for a Western capitalist, yeah, who cares about those people? You just want to exploit those people anyways.
Not to mention the hundreds of millions of people around the world. Even before that, like during the actual fall, first a failed coup on Gorbachev, right? And then the actual coup of Yeltsin, after millions and millions got put into making him the president so they could dismantle the Soviet Union. It still took him bringing tanks into Moscow. Like, think about that. Like, the idea that that's going out with a whimper is just silly. It's just evidence. It drives me crazy that these people get away with lying. And if ever we could challenge them publicly, they would run screaming from us like scared little girls. Like I don't know. I'm sorry. It's starting to get to me and I'm tired.
Economically bereft, militarily exhausted, no longer able or willing to enforce its will. Communism had failed in every possible way.
Pause it one more time. I'm sorry. See what I mean? It goes from an untrue premise, and then everything follows from that. It assumes it wants to enforce its will. What the fuck does that even mean? It's just silliness.
Yeah, what does it mean to say that they failed morally too? By whose subjective, moral standards? Like,
they're totalitarians, Eddie. You didn't know that?
Oh, I didn't realize that totalitarianism equals immoral. Okay, now I know.
Totalitarian.
Morally, it had tried to create a utopia on Earth and instead created hell for all of the nations that came under its sway. Yes, the forces of liberty eventually won the Cold War, but this triumph offers little consolation to millions who died or suffered needlessly through no fault of their own.
All right, I'm done talking about Marxism being utopian. From now on, when people say that, I'm just going to pull out socialism, utopian, and scientific and just hit them over the head with it. Like, imagine me hitting this Prager, you guy. Read this, you stupid idiot. Stop saying stupid things. Learn to read a book before you open your stupid mouth.
We got it when we achieve socialism, we got to get like a Marxist Key and Peele so that we got to start saving the ideas, and we got to get all these sketches done. But it's not just that stuff is done very cool in terms of the graphics. They also have sound. They tried to create a heaven on earth, and it was had a very nice sound, but it was hell. Run. It works. It's the form that gets people. Because if you had like, I remember, I know Tom has told me about this before, but when he was growing up, they even allowed like on national television for there to be debates from the different parties in the U.S. And there was equal time, 30 minutes for each party. And it was like that how Tom started becoming a socialist, because he saw the Socialist Labor Party guy one time and he started getting into it. And it's like that's not even allowed anymore. And there's such a difference in the material objective financial forces that ground each ideology's ability to speak. And that's really what I'm amazed at, that they're not saying anything of substance. not one claim they've made has been true, verifiable, and none of them would be the sorts of claims that, if they were in a debate with anyone in this here, that they wouldn't get like fired up for it. You know, they get flamed for every single statement that they've said, and they'd be publicly humiliated. I know a while back we tried to get them to debate us on Twitter, and they never reached out, and they won't reach out, because it would be very embarrassing for them.
They responded to one of my videos directly right when they started, and
They got ratioed.
Yeah, we ratioed the shit out of this like poor, young person who I'm sure they hired and gave a bunch of money to say that, I said that we should nationalize major industries and reinvest the surplus in the people. She's like, yes, because I'd love all our industries to run just like the DMV. And I was just like, well, the DMV is a public service that exists under capitalism. Nationalization of the industries under socialism, it just like explained that their argument was fallacious and wrong. It was within a TikTok, within a 1-minute TikTok, I was able to explain that, and people saw right through it. But they don't engage directly usually for that reason. Because they would get flamed in front of everyone, like Carlos said. So you just get these nicely produced videos of an official looking guy in a suit, saying very authoritative things with no evidence, or making very authoritative claims with very little evidence.
I'm working on the last bit of energy here, so if I struggle through this point, I'm sorry. But that's why they have to consistently claim that a part of the ruling class and their political puppets are communists. Because people hate the government. They hate the government. But it's not the government in abstract that they hate. They hate a very specific type of government. And that's why they use those arguments, which are like, the DMV sucks, or this sucks, or this. It's insane how they've been able to use the people hating their state to their advantage. It is the capitalist state which the people in this country have experienced. And it is that state which has led their anti-government sentiment. And somehow they're able to manipulate this and twist it into comparing anything the state does with communism. And in so doing, discrediting anything that communism is, because it's just big government. And since the reference point for government is capitalist government, who the hell wants big government? Who wants big government if the government we have now sucks ass? So maybe more government, it's even worse. So they use something that shows how deficient they are, how bad their state is, to their favor. And that, at least from the standpoint of how they're able to manipulate it, is pretty impressive. They're able to get something that shows that they suck and use it to argue for why they're the best.
It's incredible, and it's a powerful argument. That's why there's so many libertarians in the U.S. I feel like there are a lot of, I have a friend who tells me, I agree with all that stuff you say about socialism and communism. I just want to do it without the government. It's like, well, the point is to take power of the people who have the government right now, buddy. No offense, Keegan, you're a smart guy, but come on, quit falling for this shit, Keegs.
I don't know about the smart guys. Both of you ate chicken and put it in fucking rice without cooking it. I thought it was the most stupid thing I've ever seen. I texted you as soon as I saw it. I was trying to save you from eating it. You ate it and you had salmonella for like 2 weeks. So I don't think you're hanging around, Nobel laureates